Hello Internet friends, Chris Masto here with another Glowforge tutorial. Today we have a really exciting one, Snapmarks. If you've used a Glowforge, you know that the way you align your artwork on your material is using a camera system, and that camera system is not always very accurate. So it can be difficult to get things to line up if they have to be fairly precise. Some people have figured out how to use jigs and other methods to work around the alignment issues, but what we'd really like is for these cameras to be able to do the alignment for us, and now with Snapmarks you can. Now Snapmarks is sort of in testing. It's not available as of this recording on all machines. It's being rolled out slowly, and it's unclear what exactly Glowforge plans to do with this in the future. But as people are beginning to get this feature available on their machines, I want to show you how you can use it to do projects that require precise alignment. In this case, we're going to make some paper dolls. A while ago, I supported a Kickstarter for a Ruth Bader Ginsburg action figure. And as kind of a joke, the creator sent all of the backers a bunch of these paper doll files. I don't think they really intended people to print them and cut them out, but I realized that I have a laser cutter, and this is the perfect application for Snapmarks. So let's take a look at how you could do something like this. Here's what the file looks like as it came out of the PDF. You can see that there's a kind of a gray background and a white outline around these, suggesting that you might cut out around this white area if you wanted to actually make this. So we'll start there. I'm going to go into Illustrator and create a new file. And unlike I would normally do and use my Glowforge template, in this case I'm going to use letter. And this is landscape orientation, so I'm going to make sure that my file is landscape orientation. Just create that like so. Center it nicely, Control 0. And now I want to place the artwork on my file, so I'm going to go to File, Place, and I will open this up, and it's giving me the option of where I want to put it, so I want to make sure I put it in the upper left corner. This file happens to be exactly letter size, so it fits right onto the letter size artboard there with no problem. The only problem is that it's a PDF. So I wanted to show you here, when you have a PDF like this, they come in nested clip groups inside of clip groups inside of clip groups inside of clip groups inside of clip groups. Completely pointless. The only thing I actually want is way down inside here, there's an image. And that image is everything. So if I hide just that one thing, that's the only content here. All these clip groups and clipping paths are completely unnecessary. So I'm just going to drag that all the way up to the top here, because I want to keep the image and all the other stuff is still highlighted, so I'm going to hit delete and just get rid of all of that. Layer hygiene, group hygiene, I think is very important when you're doing stuff in Illustrator. If you start getting messy layers and things, you're going to have a hard time. So now we've got a nice clean image in here, and what I want to do is, since this is a bitmap, of course, in order to make any sense of it, I'm going to need to trace it. I don't have a vector file. It looks like it originally was done in something like Illustrator. It would be cool if I had that file, but I don't. So first thing I'm going to do actually is select this image object and duplicate it, because the trace operation is destructive. So it'll destroy my image and replace it with a trace, and we want to actually keep the original image for alignment purposes, and because we have to print it out. So I'm going to go to duplicate here in the little hamburger menu, and now we have two images, and now I can go and actually trace this. So I'm going to use the Quick Actions button here in Properties, select Image Trace, and we'll just select Default. Get a warning here that says it's slow because it's large. Yeah, computers are fast these days. Not something I'm really worried about. Okay, and this is the, it'll go with the default trace right now, and I need to open up the Trace Options panel in order to make some changes to get what I want. The only thing I really need to adjust here is to set the threshold. This goes from 0 to 255. If I set it to 254, then it'll redo the trace, and everything that is not white will be part of the trace, which is actually perfect, because this gets us a nice clean outline around the stuff we're interested in. So I'm going to close the trace panel, and then I'm going to go and expand my trace, which is the button that actually turns it into vectors. And so now I've got a bunch of vectors here. They are filled in weird ways, so before I do anything else, I'm just going to go in and And actually, first my colors, I should have done that earlier. You know I'm a stickler for swatches, so I'd like to point out while I'm here that because I created a new print preset letter document, it has all of these unnecessary color swatches in it. And I'm very picky about color swatches, so I'm going to go and delete all of these, starting at the white, scroll all the way down to the bottom, shift click on the last one, click the garbage can, get rid of these swatches because they really bug me. Okay, now I'm a little bit happier. I'll be even happier when I go into my swatch library for Glowforge, user defined. If you don't know what I'm doing now, watch my earlier video on setting up Illustrator for Glowforge, and it will explain all of this stuff. So what I wanted to do is just make sure that the only colors used in this document are what I, from my standard Glowforge palette. So, okay, now that I've got my swatches all cleaned up, we can proceed. I want to set the fill on all of these to none, and I want to set the stroke on all of these to something that I can see nicely. Let's call it red. So now we have a nice red line there. If I hide the image, you can see that this is all traced in red. Looks pretty good. There are obviously some duplicate lines and some unnecessary extra stuff here because of the way the image was set up. Again, there's a border between the gray and the white, and then there's a border between the white and the other stuff. I really want this outside one, which is pretty convenient because it'll turn out, when we look at this, if I select, here's a tip, we have a group here, and so if I'm in my selection tool, the V key, not the direct selection tool A, but selection tool, and I click on this, it'll select the entire group. However, if I double click on it, it'll go into isolation mode for that group. And so now I'm in isolation mode for that group, and I can select individual things. Like if I just wanted to go into this R, for example. Now if I click here, you can probably see that there's some purple stuff. And the purple stuff is actually exactly all of the stuff that I want. Because if I open up the group here, you'll see there's a whole bunch of different paths. And just one of these paths that's currently highlighted down at the bottom, this compound path, is the one that is basically the border between the gray stuff and the white stuff. So that's cool. So I want to keep that, and since I'm in isolation mode, it's the only thing I can affect, I will go into select inverse, and it'll select everything other than what was just selected. And I can now hit delete on the keyboard and delete all of that unnecessary extra artwork, which is cool. And then there's finally a little bit of cleanup here. There is a box around the outside. I'm not interested in that. So I'm going to press A to go to the direct selection tool and just click on this path and hit delete on the keyboard. And you can see it deleted part of it, didn't delete all of it, but the rest of the connected pieces of the path are now selected. So I can hit delete a second time and it'll delete the whole rest of it. And now it's looking really good. So I'm going to hit escape to get out of isolation mode. And again, turn on my background just so I can see it. Looks good. Turn it back off. Yep, looks good. So now a couple things here that I want to do to clean this up even further. You might notice over in this section, let me zoom in here a little bit. This is a little bit tight, so we traced around the G and we traced around the cupcakes, but again, this is why I think the person who made this didn't really expect anyone to actually cut it out, because they didn't make their white border around here all one contiguous thing, right? So the G is sort of floating out in empty space. So this border is not really big enough is the problem, but that's easy enough to resolve. Let's go zoom back out with Control-0, and I can select this path here, and I can now, I see all of these dots and handles and things here, which reminds me that I'm using the direct selection tool. I normally like to keep it on this one. And now if we go to Object, Path, Offset Path, sorry, it's late. Object Path, Offset Path, I can now turn on the preview here and you can see the additional offset line. So I've created a path that's offset by 3 points. That's a number I like to use, so it's in here, but depending on your last used options in Illustrator, it could be any number. I think sometimes it defaults to 10. 10's a little bit too much from experimentation here, I think 3 point is actually a pretty good offset from the original path, so I'm going to keep that. And I set the joins to round because sometimes miter can give you really weird little pointy edges. In this case, it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. And I'm going to click OK now. And now where we previously had one path, we now have two. The one that's I just created and the original. So I don't need the original one anymore. Let's just make sure we know which one that is. That's the one that's currently visible. So I'm going to delete this before it causes any trouble. And now turn this one back on. Yeah, and there's our sort of offset path. And you can see when I did the offset, it took care of my problem over here with the cupcakes by sort of bubbling that out. And now the G expanded to connect with the rest of it. And this doesn't look like it's going to fall apart anymore. So it's all looking pretty good. And these things are not too tight up against the artwork like they previously were. Only a couple of little issues remain with this. Down here, there are these brown boxes. I think these are meant to be tabs that you fold back, and those didn't come out in our original trace. And also because I expanded that path, offset that path, I should say, the box down here, we'll take a closer look so you can see what I'm talking about. This box down here is now offset from the bottom as well. So let's fix this before we finish it up. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to eyeball this. Normally I don't really like to eyeball things, but this is simple enough. I'm just going to make a rectangle that looks about right from one corner of this tab to the bottom corner of the other tab. Get it in there a little bit more accurately. Cool. All right, pretty happy with that. And then how do we clean up the both the overlap and the fact that the bottom of this is unnecessarily bulging out? An interesting technique you can use here, you know what a big fan I am of getting familiar with the Pathfinder tools. So if you select both of these paths, so I went over here to my layers panel to do that, but you could also do it by hitting V and clicking on this one and shift clicking on this one. Either way. Now if I go over to Pathfinder, there are a lot of different Pathfinder thingies. The one that I'm interested in is called Divide, and you can kind of see from the schematic here that what it does is it uses one path to divide another one into pieces. So if I click that one, then now we have a group here that's got a whole bunch of little bits and pieces in it. And the nice thing about that is if I hit my A key for direct selection tool, I can now select this path and notice that the part that's selected is just the bottom part that's hanging out here, because this rectangle, it's almost like this rectangle was a kind of a blade, and every place where these paths intersected, they got cut. So now rather than this being the entire thing, it's just this bottom section, and I can hit my delete key and hit it a second time, and now I've removed the bottom sticky outy part. And of course now we still have to deal with the fact that these are independent pieces, but that's easy enough to do by just selecting this whole group and going to Pathfinder Unite. And now it's all one unit. So if I zoom back out, you can see it's all united back together into one thing. Now I'm going to fix one other thing that you might have noticed here. I zoom back in. So while we've united this together and we fixed the bottom part, we didn't fix the sides. I don't really like the way that this looks, where this edge is sort of misaligned with the box. Again, easy enough to fix. Direct selection tool A, and now what we can really do is just oh, this is a good example of a potential problem. I've got my direct selection tool and I want to drag out a box around this area just to select that part of the path. But when I try to do that, I'm moving my image. So if you go in and you hit lock on the image, then that will prevent that from being selected inadvertently. So now I can drag out the box around here, and I can just grab this part of the path, and I can hold down the shift key to make sure I'm only moving it horizontally, and I'll just move it in until it's in the right spot. And then we'll just move over here and do the same thing. So drag out a box around this path, Shift, drag it in until it's about where I want it. Basically, I want the bottom of that path to be at or inside of the brown tab there, so that when I fold it back, it kind of looks right. Okay. The other part here, you might be looking at this and saying, well, what about this gray? There's a bit of gray stripe that's now inside. That's not going to be a problem because I don't intend to print this as is. This is my next trick here. I cheated a little bit, and before I started the video, I went into Photoshop and I created a version of this where I just removed the gray. What I'm going to do now is actually, we're kind of done with this image. I don't need this image anymore. So I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to replace it with a new one. File, place, and I have this other one here called Marty White Background. And in this case, it's the same exact image except that I took out the gray. So if I readjust my layers here so that this image is underneath the cut line, you can see in this one, you don't notice that, that gray stripe because there is no gray stripe. The gray is all gone. So this allows me to print this out and get a cleaner look. And then the last thing I think I'm going to do, because I realize adding the rectangle here and cutting the path and all that has now caused it to be a whole bunch of disparate pieces. And just for neatness, I would like this to actually be a compound path, which you can do by going to Object, make Compound Path Make, or Control-8. That's a useful keyboard shortcut to remember because it can get used a lot. So now we only have two things in here. We have the image with the white background, which is that, and we have the compound path, which is that. So we're almost ready to go, but the star of the show is missing, Snapmarks. Snapmarks are images that you can put into your file, and the Glowforge is able to use them as registration marks. It will find them with the camera, and then it'll go over and look at them with the high-resolution head camera, and then all of your artwork will snap to the Snapmarks. In order to make that work, you need to include Snapmarks in the file, print it with the Snapmarks in it, and then the Glowforge can find them. When you get access to the Snapmarks feature on your Glowforge, they send you a link to a template file, so I'm going to place that as well, the Snapmark template here. So they'll give you this SVG, which you can download from the Glowforge website. And what it is it's a file with two Snapmarks in it. So I'm just going to place it here. And I'm going to zoom out because they're separated by 15 inches, which in this case I obviously can't fit onto an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. But that's okay. As long as they're vertically aligned, you can move them to be closer to each other. So I'm going to find a better spot for them. Move this down here. And now again, I'm going to use the same trick I used before. This is in a group, so if I double click on it, it'll go into isolation mode and it will let me move this one independently. I'm going to do it very carefully, hold down the Shift key while I'm doing it, and make sure that it says there, see where it says DY0? That means I'm not moving it at all up and down, I'm just moving it left. So they remain vertically aligned, and the Snapmarks feature will work correctly if you do that. I think it's probably a good idea to keep them as wide as you possibly can get away with, because that way when the camera finds the two of them, it's going to have the most distance to work with in order to figure out the offset of your machine. All right, exiting isolation mode now. We are finally ready to print this thing. So that's what it looks like. I'm going to save my file, and we'll call this Marty Doll, like that. Okay, and so I'm going to save a copy, because I saved the Illustrator file in case I want to go back and edit it later, but I need to save an SVG for the Glowforge. I like to do that by selecting Save a Copy, change it to SVG, and I'm going to delete the word copy here because we can have a different file with a different extension. It's not a problem. Make sure when you do this, again, you can check my other videos for information about this, but make sure you have your type, convert to outline, image, embed, presentation attributes for CSS, responsive should be off, and decimal places, which defaults to 1 in Illustrator and is completely useless, should be like 3 or 4. Let's say it should be 4. I just realized I saved this incorrectly. I want to save it. When I said save a copy, I want to save a copy that looks like this. I don't want the background image to be uploaded to the Glowforge. So Glowforge only cares about the snap marks and the cut lines. So let's do this again. I knew I'd make a mistake somewhere. Okay, so now I've saved that out. And now I need to do two things. One is print it out on paper, and two is laser the paper. So step one, I'm going to hide my cut lines and my snap marks because, actually I'm not going to hide the snap marks. Keep the snap marks, hide the cut lines. I want to print it out like this without those red lines on it. So I'm just going to Control P, print. Make sure in the print dialog you have scaling is set to do not scale. If this file gets stretched, then it's not going to work properly. At least on my printer, despite the warning from Illustrator not to use it, I do have to go into the print dialog and make sure that I go into preferences, and I have to, cause I'm printing this on 110-pound cardstock from Staples, so I want it to be one-sided so it doesn't try to flip it inside the printer unnecessarily, and then I want to make sure my paper source, again, your printer will vary, but it's 110-pound cardstock, which is really 200 grams per square meter, and this is the heaviest paper that my printer has a setting for. So I'm going to use these settings. I'm just going to pop over to the printer now, stick the page in it, and I'm going to hit print, and meanwhile I'm going to turn on the Glowforge and let it do its calibration dance. Here's what the printout looks like. It's curled up a little bit because it went through the laser printer. It's cardstock. It doesn't really matter, it'll flatten out, but while I'm waiting I'm just going to give it a little reverse curl, try to get it slightly flatter again. Okay, so again here's the printout. You can see it has the snap marks on the printout. It doesn't have the red lines. Those are just going to be used for the Glowforge. The problem with cutting paper in the Glowforge is that after it cuts the little pieces out and they become loose and detached from the page, the fan in the Glowforge will blow them around the machine. So that's a problem in a number of ways. It gets in the way of the laser, and it can also just fly out into the exhaust system and block the vents and things like that. So you don't want to have that happen. One way to avoid that problem is what I've done here. I have a piece of chipboard in my machine that I have sprayed with a spray adhesive and let it dry overnight. So now it's tacky, and I can take this paper and I can stick it in there, and this will hold it down. So I'm just going to do that, get it in a decent spot, and then just lightly press it down, especially in the parts that are going to pop up. There we go. So nothing's going to go anywhere. Close that back up. And this is where the greatness of Snapmarks is. I don't have to position this in any particular spot. I don't have to be careful to get it all straight. Any angle will work. So when I go back to my computer and I go into the Glowforge interface, I'm now going to upload the file. And that'll come into the Glowforge interface like this. And again, the beauty of the Snapmarks feature, it doesn't matter where I place this, of course, as long as it's within the working area of Glowforge, then it should work. So first I'm going to go in here, because I'm certainly not using proof grade material. And I measured this with calipers earlier. The chipboard is 0.05 inches, and the cardstock is 0.01 inches. So the total is 0.06. Whoops, 0.06. And now all I have to do at this point, without touching anything even, is just click this new button up here, this magnet that says Align to Snapmark. When I click that button, it'll say Scanning for Snapmarks. This may take a few minutes. And from this point on, you're not supposed to move anything inside the machine. We go over here, it's analyzing the picture that it takes with the lid camera in order to find the Snapmarks. And then you'll see that it moves the head camera over to each of the Snapmarks and takes a picture of it, and is then able to use that. See, so it's now getting a picture of the left side one with the head camera. It's a little slow. And now it's going over to the right side one. But it obviously was able to locate them. It'll grab a picture of that. Then it returns to home, sends the files up to the cloud, and the magic cloud processing does the rest of the work. So you have to sit here a little bit and wait for this, this gray banner to go away that says scanning for snap marks. And then the next thing you should see should be the artwork automatically move itself to be lined up in exactly the right spot. And there we go, look at that. So the artwork is all lined up. And of course, because the camera image is not terribly accurate, if I zoom in here, you know, it looks like it's a little bit out of alignment. But it actually really is in alignment. That's just the camera image that's a problem here. I measured it earlier with a ruler, and I was getting somewhere around 0.5 millimeter of offset. So it is really precise. So it'll say looking good, click print to continue. And now what I will do in here is I don't want to do anything with the snap marks. They came in as a separate step, so I can just ignore the snap mark step. And now I can go to my cut. And I know from previous experience that 155 is a good setting for cutting out cardstock on my machine. And I'm going to click print. And it's all normal from here. It's just as if I had placed everything perfectly on my own, except in this case I let the Snapmarks feature do the placing. So it'll do the scanning as always, and now it's ready to go. So 2 minutes and I should have my paper doll. I know I went through a number of steps in this video, but this is a technique that's applicable to anything where you want to print something out and then you want to be able to align your laser cut or engrave or score to the printout. All you have to do is place those two snap marks in the file and make sure that they are vertically aligned. And then when you print it out, put it in the laser, hit the snap mark magnet, and your artwork should automatically snap right to it. The rest of what I did here was just preparing the artwork. Almost done. And there we go. Just wait for it to cool down. Okay, let me go take this out of Glowforge. I'm just going to take the whole thing out. Bring it over here where we can see a little better. And pull this off of my adhesive mat. There we go. I've set the power just a teensy bit low on this one, but it's fine for demonstration purposes. Okay, there we go. Detached all the pieces. There we go. I've got a less reflective background I can use to make these things a little easier to see. But yeah, there we go. So that's the paper doll that I can call my own. Just fold these tabs back here. Like that. Set Marty up. Give him this little chef's hat. So you can have a lot of fun with this technique. It's very similar to print and cut on a craft cutter, vinyl cutting machine type of thing. But now you can do it with your Glowforge, and it demonstrates how accurate and easy the snap marks feature can be. So whether you're engraving pencils with a jig or making paper dolls or stickers or other kinds of things, I'm sure there are 1,001 different ideas people are going to come up with for how to use snap marks to do projects that were difficult or annoying to do before on Glowforge. If you found this video useful, please subscribe to my channel. You can comment on the video, like it, click the little bell button thing. Sometimes I do live streams. I've been trying to do more of those. But anyway, that's another dimension to the channel that I'm hoping to get better at as I go on. And with that, I'm going to say bye-bye for now.